Welcome students to this video lesson for 10th class economics chapter 3rd, that is money and credit. Now we have studied in the previous lessons that people obtain loans from various sources. Now these sources can be conveniently grouped as number one, formal sector loans, or people take loans from informal sectors as such. When we talk of formal sectors, in which this we find the banks are the one and the cooperatives. So banks and cooperatives. The informal lenders include money lenders, then traders, employers, relatives, friends, etc. So they all come under informal lenders. So two type of lenders are there. One, the formal, and second is the informal lenders. Right? Now the graph, if you see this graph in the book, you can see various sources of credit to rural households in India. Is more credit coming from the formal sector or the informal sector? So this is a very important sort of a question here, that from where people are getting more loans. Now the Reserve Bank of India supervises the functioning of formal sources of loans. For instance, we have seen that banks maintain a minimum cash balance out of the deposits they receive. As you are aware of, banks they receive deposits from their depositors, and they can invest, but 15%, that is minimum cash they must have to cater for their day-to-day needs. So the RBI monitors the banks in actually maintaining cash balance. So this cash balance of maintenance, as far as is concerned, it is done by Reserve Bank of India. Similarly, the RBI sees that the banks give loans not just to profit-making businessmen or businesses and traders, but also to small cultivators, small scale industries, to small borrowers, etc. Because banks, being public sector banks, they are not supposed to only cater for the needs of big houses, big businessmen, or the rich people or traders as such, but they also are they are required to give loans to others too, that is small cultivators, farmers, like that. Now, periodically, banks have to submit information to the RBI on how much they are lending to whom and what interest they are doing this. So here we find that RBI keeps a sort of a check on the banks by taking information about their lending status, the people who have taken the loans, and the interest rate the banks are charging. So this way the control is there. There is no organization which supervises the credit activities of lenders in the informal sector. This is a very important point. In informal sectors, things are not very good because there is no such control. Because in formal sectors, of course, banks are controlled by Reserve Bank of India, but in informal sectors, there is no such supervision possible. They can lend at whatever interest rate they want, as you have seen in the previous few examples. At times, they are charging 5% per month, almost 60% per year. So anyhow, we have seen in the previously, there is no one to stop them from using unfair means to get their money back, muscle power, or many other things. So so here we find that things are pretty bad as far as informal sector is concerned. Compared to the formal lenders, most of the informal lenders charge a much higher interest on their loans. This interest is quite high. Thus, the cost to the borrower of informal loans is much higher. Higher cost of borrowing means a larger part of the earnings of the borrowers is used to repay the loans. Because the borrower, the person who has taken the loan, if he has taken say loan of 100 rupees, and out of this 5% he has to pay every month, so 60 rupees he is just paying as interest only. So whatsoever he earns basically goes into profits. Hence, borrowers have less income left for themselves, because once say he has earned about 70-80 bucks on 100 rupees, so 60 rupees will be going just for his interest per year. So what is left with? As we see, we have just another case which we had studied of Shamal in Sonpur. In certain cases, the high interest rate of borrowing can mean that the amount to be repaid is greater than the income of the borrower. This could lead to increasing debt, as we see in case of Rama and Sonpur. So such people, they come under a debt trap because they earn but the most of the money or the most of the earnings go to their money lender as interest. So because of high cost of borrowing. For these reasons, banks and cooperative societies need to lend more, because banks are basically public sector banks being controlled by public sector, and same are the cooperatives also. Again, they have there's some direct or indirect control over cooperative societies. So this would lead to higher incomes, and many people could then borrow cheaply for a variety of needs. So there is a requirement that banks and cooperative societies should give more and more loans to the people, especially those people who are really poor and whose means are very limited. They could grow crops, do business, set up small scale industries, etc. They could set up new industries of trade or trade in goods. Cheap and affordable credit is crucial for countries' development. People can work only if money is there, and money has to be provided at affordable credit, the rate people which the interest people can pay. So this is very important for the growth of the nation. Now, formal and informal credit. We who gets what? For student, please refer to this graph nicely given in your book. The people are divided into four groups. Number one, poor to rich, as we find in this figure. Here you find 85% of the loans taken by poor households in the urban areas are from informal sectors. So 85% of the loans, poor people, or as such we can say the urban areas, they are taken from informal sources. Compare this with the rich urban households. What do you find? Only 10% of their loans are from informal sources, while 90% are from formal sources. So if we compare here poor and the rich, here we find poor are getting only 15% of the poor are getting loans from the formal sector, rest 85% are taking from informal sectors. While in case of rich urban households, 10% of their loans are from informal sources and 90% they are getting from the banks. So again, might is right, we should say, because I mean they can afford. I mean they can do something by which they can get loan. A similar pattern is also found in rural areas. The rich households are availing cheap credit from formal lenders, whereas poor households have to pay a large amount for borrowing. So here it's very pathetic situation, we should say, where rich can have loans without much problem, and the poor, the people who really need loans, hardly they get anything. So let's see further. So what do we conclude from all this discussion? First, the formal sector still meets only about half of the total credit needs of the rural people. The remaining credit needs are met from informal sources. Most loans from informal lenders carry a very high interest rate and do little to increase the income of the borrowers. Thus, it is necessary that banks and cooperatives increase their lending, particularly in the rural areas, so that the dependence on informal sources of credit reduces. So, in villages, people need not go to money lender; rather, they may be going for the public sector banks and cooperatives to take loans. Public sector banks and private banks are also having similar conditions, so they can avail loan from any of these sources. Secondly, while formal sector loans need to expand, it is also necessary that everyone receives these loans, not only few rich, but the people who do not have many resources, even or they cannot show any collateral. So there should be some scheme by which they can also take loans. At present, it is the richer households who receive formal credit, whereas the poor have to depend on informal sources. Because rich households have got something, they show they can always show as their property or like that. It is important that the formal credit is distributed more equally so that the poor can benefit from the cheaper loans. Let us see a few important questions over here. What are the differences between formal and informal sources of credit? Number one, the first is the borrowing capacity or the borrower's capacity. Formal sources of credit, richer people having assets which can be pledged as collaterals. So you can always show as collateral and can take loan, because as rich person, people have got assets. Assets means property or other maybe business concerns like that. Informal sources of credit, poorer people not having assets which can be pledged. So they do not have anything to show. Rate of interest reasonably low. Interest banks, the interest they charge is quite less as compared to very high rate of interest in informal sources, going at times around 5% per month, 3 to 5% per month, as we have seen in our example. Sources are banks and cooperative societies. Here sources are traders, moneylenders, landowners, etc., and they can have their own terms and conditions. No one can, no one has any check on them. While banks and cooperatives, as such, they are under some control. Banks, as you are aware of, RBI is keeping a sort of a watch or check on banks. Action on default of payment. Collaterals can be confiscated and sold to recover the loan. In case the people or the person who has taken loan cannot pay it back, his property or his collaterals rather, which he has shown at the time of the loan, can be confiscated. Confiscated means it is taken by the bank and it is sold. We call it auctioned at times, and then the money which is recovered from that is taken against the loan. So loan recovery is made. Borrowers can be made as bonded laborers. Now, what do you mean by the term here, bonded laborer? Bonded laborer means that the person who has taken the loan and has not been able to pay back is asked to work as a laborer in the field, or maybe as a domestic help or something of that sort, and he's not paid or she's not paid anything out of for that. So this is what is called bonded laborer. So naturally very bad state of affairs, we should say. And then subsequently, in case they have got some land, now the person who has given the loan may ask them, okay, give your land to me against that loan. So land is, you can say, is taken that way. So this is what was all about the differences between formal and informal sources of credit. Next question comes, why should credit at reasonable rates be available for all? Very important. Credit at reasonable rates should be available for all, so that the poor people can also take the benefit. It's not only the rich who should be given credit because they have got better collaterals, but also the poor people. And the conditions or terms and conditions in their case should be very liberal, so that they can afford that transaction, or they can afford that loan. Should there be a supervisor such as Reserve Bank of India that looks into the loan activities of informal lenders? Why would its task be quite difficult? Yes, very important. There should be a supervisor, the person or the institution who can check the loan activities of informal lenders, money lenders. However, its task is quite difficult because informal sector constitutes many people who have different kinds of businesses of their own besides lending. They are not registered with the government also. So it's very difficult to evolve such a mechanism. But yes, some mechanism needs to be in place so that some check could be made in the informal sector also. Then comes next part, the next question. Why do you think that the share of formal sector credit is higher for the richer households compared to the poorer households? Now the answer to this question is quite simple. The share of the formal sector credit is higher for the richer households because the richer households are in a better position to provide collaterals and other necessary documents. Because as you are aware of, banks will give loans only if there is something available as collateral. So rich people or rich households have got such collaterals available, so they always show it to a bank and take loans. But where from poor will bring all this? So richer households have means to exert pressure also on the banks, and cooperative to sanction loans. Richer households have greater capacity to repay the loans compared to the poor households. No wonder that more or less loans are taken by rich people only. With this, we finish this lesson. Now there are few questions as assignment. So complete your this assignment, send it to me as photograph, and subsequently the audio of the same. Procedure for audio remains the same. First read the question, then secondly give the answer. Again read next question, give the answer. Once you prepare this, send it for checking. So all the best. Here comes the questionnaire for the assignment. So in all students, this assignment has got 14 questions, starting with which are formal sector loans and ending with again, why do you think that the share of formal sector credit is higher for the richer households compared to the poor households? So go through these questions and again go through the assignment, correction the video, and try to understand the grasp and how you are going to attempt these questions. So once you complete, please send a photograph along with the audio. So all the best. Bye bye.